In our family, unlike my friends' homes where parents made the decisions, my grandmother was the true matriarch. And for good reason. She had built our luxury dinnerware store from nothing, growing it into a thriving business that made us wealthy. I can still hear my father's proud voice telling customers, "My mother has an eye for beautiful things," whenever they complimented our collection. My parents managed the day-to-day operations, but everyone knew who the real owner was. Grandma had only partially retired to enjoy her later years, never truly relinquishing control. My brother Caleb had been designated as the heir apparent from the moment he could walk. While my mother insisted that he needed to learn everything about the business, I was merely an afterthought to her. It didn't matter that I earned perfect grades while Caleb barely touched his books. I can still hear Caleb's dismissive voice as he lounged on the sofa playing video games instead of doing homework, saying he didn't need to be smart to run the store. "As long as I can count money," he would say, and our parents would laugh as if his comment was endearing. Meanwhile, I sat at the dining room table, wrestling with advanced math problems. But I had a secret advantage that no one else knew about. Every weekend, Grandma invited me to her house to play what she called the business game. She taught me everything: store management, inventory control, customer service, calculating profit margins, and negotiating with suppliers. "Now Victoria," she would say, setting up a toy store on her living room table, her eyes twinkling with excitement. She would pose questions like calculating the profit margin on a $10,000 crystal set with a $4,000 cost, watching me work through the numbers. 60%, Grandma, I would exclaim eagerly, always adding, "But we should factor in operating costs too." Her face would light up with that radiant smile I loved, reaching into her seemingly endless drawer of small gifts. "That's my girl," she would say proudly, "you understand business better than most adults I know." These sessions weren't just fun, they awakened something inside me. While my parents focused on grooming Caleb to inherit the store, I was quietly making my own plans. I dreamed of studying business in college, taking my skills to the next level. Everything changed when I turned 14. I remember that afternoon as if it were yesterday. After dinner, my parents summoned me to the living room. I could tell from my father's stern gaze that this wouldn't be a pleasant conversation. My father's cold eyes bore into me as he announced that my mother and he had decided I was done being lazy and would start helping with the family business. Starting tomorrow, he declared, I would work at the store after school. The next day, my new life began. While Caleb went home to play video games and relax, I was mopping floors, dusting shelves, arranging expensive china, and doing every other task the store required. Yet each day, I renewed my silent promise to myself. Someday, I would use everything Grandma had taught me to create something far greater than they could imagine. I was determined to prove my worth, working harder than anyone expected. I often stayed late, making sure every crystal glass sparkled and every display was perfectly arranged. After several months of working alongside the adult employees, I began to notice something unsettling. Every Friday, they would receive their paychecks, excitedly sharing weekend plans and discussing how they would spend their money. Meanwhile, I worked just as hard, sometimes harder, but received absolutely nothing. One afternoon, when the store was empty and I saw my parents counting the day's earnings, I gathered my courage and approached them. With trembling voice, I approached them saying, "Mom, Dad, I've been thinking. I do the same work as other employees, sometimes even multiple tasks at once. Shouldn't I be paid too?" The look they exchanged made my blood run cold. My father's face hardened while my mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "Paid?" My father scoffed with contempt. "Do you have any idea how much we spend on you? Food, clothes, roof over your head, you think all that's free?" I tried to argue back, saying, "But that's different, as parents you're supposed to dash." My mother cut me off harshly, saying they didn't need lectures about parental obligations. She declared that my work was payment for everything they provided. She added that many children would be grateful for such an arrangement. I fought back tears that threatened to fall. Then my mother stepped closer, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper that I would never forget. She made it crystal clear. I was not to breathe a word of this to Grandma. This was their business, she hissed, and they would run it as they saw fit. If they found out I had complained to Grandma, she warned, I would regret it. For 2 years, I continued working without earning a single penny. While other employees collected their weekly paychecks, all I got were tired feet and calloused hands. But as my 16th birthday approached, I made a decision that would change everything. The day after my birthday, I walked into my parents' office with my head held high. I quit, I declared firmly. My father looked up from his desk in shock, asking me to repeat what I just said. I won't work here anymore, I repeated with determination, my heart pounding but my voice steady. I told them I needed my own money, and since they wouldn't pay me, I'd found a job at the cafe around the corner. They'd agreed to hire me part-time after school. My parents exchanged stunned looks before my mother responded first. With a calculating look in her narrowed eyes, she slowly said she understood, but there was one condition. We would tell Grandma that I was still working at the store. She didn't need to know about this arrangement. When I left that office, I felt free for the first time since turning 14. The sense of finally controlling my own life was exhilarating. My first day at the cafe marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. Sally, the manager, was nothing like my parents. She was kind, patient, and appreciated her employees' efforts. The feeling of receiving a paycheck every Friday was indescribable. For the first time in my life, I had money that was truly my own. I loved everything about my new job at the cafe. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee, the regular customers who learned my name, and most importantly, colleagues who treated me as an equal, not a servant. The best part was finally being able to buy things for myself without depending on my parents. With my first paycheck, I bought a new cell phone. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine. With my second paycheck, I bought new clothes. But what I enjoyed most was buying small gifts for my grandmother. One week it would be a box of her favorite chocolates, the next week a scarf I spotted at the mall. Grandma would always receive these gifts with sparkling eyes, telling me I shouldn't spend my money on her. Those moments were the hardest because I had to lie about working at the store. When she asked about work, I made up stories about arranging displays and helping customers. You have an eye for displays, she would say with a proud smile, just like I did when I was young. Despite the guilt that gnawed at me, I convinced myself this small deception was necessary to protect my newfound freedom. During my senior year of high school, I maintained my perfect grades. My teachers started talking about top universities, with my guidance counselor telling me I could get into any prestigious school with my academic record. But I knew the truth. My parents wouldn't spend a penny on my education. That had always been clear. And while Grandma would have helped if I'd asked, I didn't want that. After years of family dependence, I needed to stand on my own. I focused on local options and discovered an excellent business program at the city university. Better yet, they offered full scholarships to students with outstanding academic records. I spent weeks perfecting my application. When the acceptance letter and scholarship offer arrived, I felt like I'd won the lottery. On graduation morning, Grandma brought me a special gift. With a smile, she presented me with a beautiful laptop, saying it was for the future businesswoman. She hugged me tight, saying she believed I would do amazing things with it. That evening, at a graduation dinner attended only by my parents and brother, I decided it was time to share my news. Trying to keep my voice casual, I announced that I would be attending the City University's business program. I added that I'd received a full scholarship. The silence that followed was broken by my father's calculating smile. He exchanged looks with my mother, saying this worked out well. My mother wiped her mouth with her napkin, adding that at least they wouldn't have to worry about tuition. Then she moved on to what she called the next matter. Since I was now an adult and high school graduate, she said, we needed to discuss living arrangements. What do you mean? I asked, my fork stopping midway to my mouth. Rent, my father said bluntly, announcing that starting that day, if I wanted to continue living there, I would need to pay rent. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, but it wasn't. The situation was absurd, but my parents' serious expressions left no room for doubt. The laughter died in my throat. You can't be serious, I said, looking back and forth between them. I'm your daughter. My mother responded coldly that I was an adult now. She stated they no longer had any legal obligation to support me. This is our house, she declared, and if you want to continue living here, you'll have to pay your share. My mind was spinning in confusion. What about Caleb? I asked, pointing to my unusually quiet brother. Will he have to pay rent too? He'll pay when he turns 18, my father answered, avoiding my eyes. That vague response told me everything I needed to know. Caleb would never have to pay. Perfect Caleb would never be treated this way. It's different, my father muttered, not even bothering to explain why. This is insane, I said, pushing my chair back. I'm your daughter. I have a right to live in my own home. This isn't your home, my mother snapped, finally dropping her mask of politeness. She declared it was their house, and if I wasn't willing to pay rent, I needed to leave that night. Tonight? I repeated in disbelief. You're throwing me out on graduation day? You have 1 hour to pack, my father said, returning to his dinner as if he hadn't just shattered my world. I ran upstairs. Through tears that blurred my vision, I numbly stuffed clothes and essentials into a suitcase. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely close the zipper. College wouldn't start for months. What was I supposed to do until then? My first thought was to turn to Grandma. I knew she would help. But when I called, it went straight to voicemail. I remembered she'd left for Cancun the day before and would be gone for at least 3 weeks. I didn't want to ruin her vacation. Wiping away tears, I searched through my phone contacts and found Alexis's number. She'd been my friend since middle school, and her family had always been kind to me. 20 minutes later, I was loading my bags into Alexis's car, leaving the only home I'd ever known. In the weeks that followed, my life fell into a new routine. I slept on Alexis's sofa bed, rising before dawn to avoid inconveniencing her family. I picked up every possible shift at the cafe, saving every penny I could. My manager Sally was a real lifeline. She understood my situation and offered me extra shifts without my having to ask. I threw myself into work, keeping my mind busy to avoid dwelling on my parents' betrayal. I focused on making perfect lattes, cleaning equipment, and ensuring everything was immaculate at closing time. You're working too hard, Alexis would say when I'd come home exhausted after double shifts. But I had no choice. I needed to save as much money as possible before college started. Besides, staying busy meant less time to think about what had happened. There were no calls or messages from my parents, and honestly, I was glad. What words could possibly justify what they'd done? After those endless 3 weeks, when Grandma returned from Cancun, I felt dizzy with hope. I waited patiently, pushing down my desperation. Finally, I decided to send her a message. Grandma, I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet? The response came quicker than expected, but instead of her usual warmth and a meeting time, it was just a link. My heart pounding, I opened it to find myself directed to my mother's social media page. What I saw made my blood run cold. It began with my mother's message, dripping with false sincerity, "My heart is breaking." She wrote that her beloved daughter Victoria had left home, but what made the situation more painful was discovering I had stolen a significant amount of money from the store's register before leaving. We gave her everything. Loved her deeply. And this is how she repays us. I never imagined my own daughter could do something so terrible. I read the post with trembling horror. My reputation was being destroyed in the comments section. Relatives, lifelong friends, and acquaintances expressed their shock and disappointment. "I can't believe Victoria would do this, she was always such a good girl. Such disrespect after everything her parents did for her. This is theft. She should be reported, daughter or not." My stomach lurched at my mother's response to this last suggestion. "Our hearts are broken, but we haven't lost hope." My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the phone. The boldness and cruelty of their lies were beyond anything I had imagined. First they threw me out of my home, and now they were trying to destroy my reputation. Without hesitation, I drove straight to Grandma's house. My heart pounded as I climbed the stairs to her door. When she opened it, her expression was unreadable, but she immediately ushered me inside. "I don't believe a word of that post," she said before I could even begin. "Sit down and tell me what's really going on." The words poured out of me like an unstoppable torrent. I told her everything. "Grandmother, I haven't worked at the store since I was 16. I've been working at the cafe around the corner instead." "I'm sorry I lied." She nodded, her face darkening as I continued. I explained everything my parents had done. I told her about them demanding rent, the threats they used to keep me quiet, and how they threw me out on graduation night. When I finished, Grandmother's hands clenched into fists. "Those brazen liars," she spat out, quickly rising to her feet. She hurried to her office and returned with a stack of documents. "Look at this," she said, handing them to me. "According to these payroll records, you've been receiving a salary from the store since you were 14. It was all being paid on paper." I stared at the documents in shock. I couldn't believe my parents had been manipulating records to cover their lies all this time. My fight for independence had transformed into a darker battle for truth and justice. Where do you think that money went after I stopped working at the store? Looking at the numbers on the screen, my mind struggled to comprehend. Thousands of dollars had been recorded under my name, all flowing into accounts I'd never heard of. Grandma, realizing the gravity of the situation, was already on the phone. "Derek, I need you to come to the store immediately. We need a complete audit. Every transaction, every account, every penny." She paused to listen, then added, "Yes, find out exactly how much money is missing from the register. I want to know the truth about these accusations against Victoria." While Grandma was on the phone, I opened my laptop. With shaking hands fueled by anger, I began typing a response to my mother's social media post. "I have kept quiet long enough. Here is the truth, I didn't steal anything. I was thrown out on graduation night for refusing to pay rent to my parents, something never asked of my brother. I haven't worked at the family store for the past 2 years. I've been working at the cafe around the corner. My parents threw me out with nowhere to go. If you want proof, ask Sally Brown, the cafe owner, about my hours, pay stubs, and work ethic." And why did my parents wait these 3 weeks, coincidentally until Grandma returned from vacation, to bring up this theft? I shared the post with my friends and colleagues. Within minutes, my boss Sally commented. She confirmed everything I'd said, stating I'd been one of her most dedicated employees for the past 2 years. She vouched for my integrity and work ethic, saying she trusted me completely with her business, customers, and reputation. She declared these accusations were completely false. Within hours, my family's social media was in chaos. Relatives who had initially condemned me began criticizing my parents with fierce anger. How dare they throw out their daughter and then lie about it? Making her work without pay since she was 14 and demanding rent on graduation night. What kind of parents are they? My mother tried to control the situation with a lengthy explanation, but things only got worse. Every excuse was countered with screenshots of Sally's confirmation and angry comments. Meanwhile, my phone kept ringing with calls from my parents, but I ignored them all. I stayed at Grandma's house while the auditor and his team examined years of financial records. One afternoon, the auditor came to see me with a grave expression. "Victoria, we've found something very serious." The numbers were staggering. My parents had been diverting money from the store into personal accounts for years. They had created fake vendor payments, inflated expenses, and pocketed the difference. Even the salary that was supposed to be paid to me had been flowing directly into accounts they controlled. But that was just part of the discovery that would change everything. The auditor looked bewildered as he finally said, "It's over $1 million. Grandma's face turned to stone. Wasting no time, Grandma called a family meeting at her home. I sat next to her as we waited for my father, mother, and Caleb to arrive. My father tried to maintain his confident demeanor, while my mother was visibly nervous, clutching her designer bag. "Sit down," Grandma commanded sharply when everyone was present. She got straight to the point. "What do you think the audit revealed?" she asked in an icy, cutting tone. "Mom, I can explain," my father attempted, but Grandmother cut him off with a voice that could slice through glass. "Explain," she said, her voice filled with rage. "Explain years of stealing from me? Taking your daughter's wages? Trying to frame her as a thief to cover your tracks?" With a dry thud, she threw the audit report onto the center table. $1 million, she declared. "You treated your daughter like a slave, threw her out on the street, all while stealing $1 million from me." My mother dissolved into tears. "Please, we can work this out," she pleaded between sobs. "Oh yes, we'll work it out," Grandma snapped, her words dripping with contempt. "You have two choices: return every cent you stole, or I'll press charges and you'll both go to prison for fraud and embezzlement." The color drained from my father's face. We don't have the money," he admitted, his voice trembling. "Then sell your cars, your vacation home, everything. Take out loans if you have to." In the end, they had no choice. They sold their luxury cars. They liquidated Caleb's college fund and took on massive debt to cover the rest. Even the beautiful house they'd thrown me out of had to be mortgaged to the limit. After the audit results were revealed, Grandma called an emergency meeting with the store's employees. There, she publicly announced that my parents would no longer have any connection to the business. I'll never forget my mother's expression as she was escorted out of the place she thought would one day be hers. "I've appointed Frank Johnson as interim manager," Grandma told me over dinner that night. "He's experienced and trustworthy. Most importantly, he understands this position is temporary." "Temporary?" I asked, intrigued. She squeezed my hand and replied, "Until you graduate. This store has always been meant for someone who understands both business and ethics. That person is you, Victoria." A week later, she made it official. The entire family gathered at her lawyer's office to watch her sign documents removing my parents from her will. "The store and majority of my assets will go to Victoria," she declared in a resolute voice. "She has earned this, not by birth into this family, but through hard work and integrity." Yet Grandma couldn't completely ignore Caleb. "Your brother will receive a portion of my estate," she explained to me later. "He's not responsible for your parents' actions, and he is still my grandchild. Surprisingly, this situation brought my brother and me closer together. Without our parents' toxic influence constantly pitting us against each other, we found a way to build a real sibling relationship. Sometimes he comes to my room just to talk about everything. About adjusting to this new reality and his plans for college now that his fund is gone. "I'm truly sorry," he said to me recently, and those words showed how far we'd come. Even in the chaos, we found a new beginning amid the wreckage our parents left behind. Back then, I was just a spoiled kid who didn't understand how unfairly you were being treated. But now I see it clearly. As for my parents, I haven't spoken to them since that day at Grandma's house. They occasionally send birthday cards, holiday messages, and attempts at reconciliation, but I return them all unopened. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Grandma visits me frequently at college. She always brings coffee from the cafe where I worked, having become a regular there after learning my story. We sit in the campus courtyard, discussing my classes and the future of the store. Just like when I was little, she teaches me everything about business. But this time with a real purpose. "Do you know what matters most in business?" she asked me recently. "Integrity. Without it, no success has real value." Your parents never understood that, but you do. Looking back, while my parents' cruel treatment deeply hurt me, it also taught me valuable lessons about who I wanted to be and who I didn't. Their actions showed me exactly what kind of businesswoman I wanted to become. Next year, I'll graduate with my business degree. The store that was supposed to be my brother's birthright will become mine through merit, not inheritance. But most importantly, I've gained something no one can take away. The knowledge that my success came not because of my family's advantages, but despite the obstacles they put in my path. Sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as trials. My parents thought they were punishing me by making me work in the store at 14, but they were actually training me. They thought throwing me out would break me, but they actually set me free. And as for that luxury dinnerware store where it all began, just watch what I'm going to do with it.